all getting along and wanting to have
That's
a good
like bull.
season.
Come on, that's like bull, right?
No. But here's my
Is
point.
it like though? Because what else are they gonna say?
Gets it off in time. And he's got it, baby! Big time Nets win!
The only Net fans you know? The only Nets fans you know?
Man.
I mean, come on, man. Or are these guys?
Welcome back to Only Net Fans You Know podcast. I'm Peter. Welcome to episode number 89. I'm joined by Adam Armbrecht of Lockedonnets. What's going on, bro?
Hey, man, it's another preseason wrapping up. It's another regular season underway.
We're filming right on the day of the last preseason game against Toronto. Everyone knows the scores. Everybody pretty much knows the performances of the players by now. Has your expectations been met?
Yeah, I think so. You know, Doug and I talked about it a lot this offseason. Obviously, you're moving into tank mode and you still have a lot of veterans on the roster. But to use his phrase, my co-host phrase, you know, the contracts matter. So the guys that are making the most money are the ones that you saw in the starting lineup primarily, outside of Cam Thomas, who obviously has his identified role. And, you know, in spite of a few injuries, guys like Claxton, Trendon Watford not being available, you already have a sense of where the starting unit is and where the first handful of guys coming off are going to be from the bench. Jalen Wilson, Zaire Williams comes in, looks good. Obviously, Noah Clowney. So nothing really groundbreaking. And this is, to me, just a lot of this team getting its legs underneath it and Jordi Fernandez getting a sample size of live game action with these guys.
What did you think of Jordi's offense? What do you think about the defense? His whole scheme in general?
Yeah, I mean, you like the principles that he's trying to bring. I think the problem you're going to run into potentially for the Nets is they just don't have the personnel all the time to do it, right? They lack ball handlers in their backcourt. The point forward is fine with Ben Simmons. We actually got, you know, really strong game from him in the second preseason game. First one looked like a lot of old hat. So, you know, defensively, the versatility you have with a number of these guys. Noah Clowney's looked really good on that end of the floor in the preseason as well. I like all of it. They're going to be a volume 3-point shooting team. They need to be. They have a lot of forwards that can pull it up from the outside. It's just a matter of, at the end of the day, not being the best roster in the league, right? So the principles are there, and I think that's what you got to dial in on is how are these players taking to that? Are they filling their roles correctly? And does Jordi see the progression over the course of the season? So, yeah, we were ecstatic about the hire at the time. Feels like the right kind of guy to go into this rebuild with. And hopefully his experience, as you mentioned, with Team Canada is just something that he can pull to it, right? Has some high leverage experience in his back pocket as a head coach. Hopefully applies it in Brooklyn now.
I love what you said, talking about Ben Simmons. He's run the offense pretty great. I think he's probably the best fit for this offense. Claxton, of course, is going to be the starting center. He's maybe the key to the team offensively and defensively because of the role he's going to play. So we have opening night in a couple days. Maybe Claxton plays, maybe he doesn't. But when he does come back, what do you do with Ben and Clax? Do you play them together?
No, you can't. I mean, listen, Jordi Fernandez talked about early in the offseason, referencing the sample sizes even before him taking the head coaching role, Ben Simmons and Nic Claxton. The thing that he left out was that the good sample size is when you had Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and players like that on the court with them. They don't have the personnel to do it. It stagnates the offense, 2 non-shooters, makes for congestion. It allows defenses to stay at home on perimeter shooters. So, you know, even though that second game looked better for Ben Simmons, it's not hard to do the ceremonial starting lineup where they're both in it and then separate their minutes pretty quickly. But I personally would just put him in the bench unit. Let him run the bench unit. You're going to have Claxton in the starting 5. That makes the most sense. You still have Schroeder there to do the ball handling duties, put some shooters around them, and then you create some flexibility. The sample sizes on Ben Simmons and Cam Thomas have been great over his, you know, brief stints here in the last couple of seasons. So think about flexing those. Claxton first man out, Ben Simmons first man in, and you continue to roll with that same type of look for the offense and for the defensive end. So, no, we do not want to see it. Is there some risk you're going to see it at least early in the season? Probably. And the only, you know, bright spot about that is that it doesn't matter to a wins and losses standpoint. We just stay focused on developing the good habits inside of Jordi Fernandez's scheme. If you have those 2 players on the court, then the systems start to break down on the offensive end.
It's tough for me with this roster because we have a mix of veterans and young guys. I would have loved to see Clax and Clowney come together and be in the starting lineup. It looks like that's not going to happen. It looks like most likely we're going to have Dorian Finney-Smith and CJ in the starting lineup come opening day. What's your take on those guys? Obviously, everyone wants them moved and whatnot. It's early in the season. GMs want to see what the rosters are going to look like. They want to see what they have with their teams. I'm not expecting a deal soon. Maybe in a couple months, maybe towards the trade deadline. How much do you think it hurts the young guys by keeping these guys on the roster and playing them the minutes that they're probably going to be getting? Because let's face it, you want to showcase them. You want to showcase their value that they could still play, right?
Yeah, we've talked about how I don't expect anybody outside of Cam Thomas to play more than 30 minutes on any given night, so they're going to still spread it out. The younger players, the Noah Klein, I mean, Jalen Wilson clearly is one of those first guys off the bench, right? Nice little 1-to-1 taking CJ out and being able to bring in Jalen Wilson. So you can see how these pieces are going to get their run. Listen, the course of the offseason, I've been a big proponent. I want the young guys to play. I want them to play, big-ish minutes just so they can continue to develop. That being said, you mentioned Dorian Finney-Smith. Like, I don't think there's a deal coming. Now, famous last words, usually when we predict something that is or is not going to occur over on Locked On Nets, it tends to come down somewhat immediately on the opposite side. But Dorian Finney-Smith, I expect to be moved. The Bogdanovich piece, which you didn't bring up, and because he's not playing and he's hurt in the foot, he might even be a buyout candidate. I really don't know what's going to happen with him. But Cam Johnson, he may be here for the entirety of this season. So I think Schroeder, I think even Shake Milton, depending on how he starts playing early in the season. There's a lot of guys that have trade value. I just wouldn't expect it to come until closer to the deadline. And then out of the deadline, you're going to get all these other pieces, right? So then you will see some of the younger players ramp up. And while I love seeing the young guys play, I think if you break it down into two halves of the year and you hold your mind on Noah Clowney and Jalen Wilson and even Trendon Watford when he comes back, right? All these younger players, they're all going to get their run and their minutes are all going to expand once you get out some of these veterans. You just have to be patient with it. We know Sean Marks has set a high bar for what he wants in return for some of these guys. Arguably, the peak of their trade value has already come and gone, but he'll get something for them. And then you'll bring in other expiring contracts because you need to keep the money right on the books. And I really don't have much concerns about how having these veterans here in the short term impacts the development of the young players overall.
I would love to see more of Jalen Wilson. And who do you want to see come opening day, come the first couple of weeks of the season, get burned out of the guys who probably aren't going to be starting?
Jalen Wilson, but I mean, listen, he MVP of the summer league, like, so he's ascending, right? And he's establishing himself. I think it's good to have Cam Johnson still on this team, whether or not he has his little injuries and whether or not the trade value, all that other stuff. But he's the perfect guy to have there for Jalen Wilson. They're not exactly the same player, but they're pretty darn similar, right? You're going to spread the floor. They're going to knock down perimeter shots. They're going to try to be a difficult mark on defense, right? Be where you need to be positionally. So I don't mind the, little bit of mentorship that maybe can go on there. And you mentioned from a minute standpoint, I expect Jalen Wilson to get close to that probably 20-minute mark early in the season. I expect Noah Clowney to be up in that 20-minute mark range, right? You go and break down the 240 again. If you don't think any of the starters outside of Thomas are getting 30 plus, well, then you're going to create these pockets. Nic Claxton, who we've always been a fan of, we're incredibly happy for him to get that contract. He's not a guy that's going to play 36 minutes a night. He's always going to be closer to 30 than he is to 35. So I think the cuts of the pie are always going to be there. Beyond Jalen Wilson, beyond Noah Clowney, Zaire Williams has obviously flashed a bit here. He has some length. I wonder what happens. And you mentioned the 3, even flexing into the 4 a little bit until Dorian Finney-Smith is gone. What's the push and pull there in terms of how many minutes get shook out? How do they work the rotations? Noah Clowney flexing between the 4 and the 5, small ball 5 lineups, right? So there could be some congestion around there. So it could be a night overnight. It could be a, back-to-back. They'll switch up the roster and rotations underneath Jordi Fernandez. It could be that this team gets blown out a lot. So in fourth quarters, you're going to have plenty of opportunity to run some of these guys 5 and 6 minutes to close out games and then sit down the veteran. So again, a lot of this stuff tends to sort itself out. And the other one last detail is there's always injuries. Injuries tend to resolve a lot of the, who's going to play and how are you going to find minutes? It's a part of the game. And I think you'll just see everybody kind of naturally fall into their roles.
Daron Sharp is going up for a contract very, very soon. He's going to be probably a restricted free agent. And I would imagine the Nets would offer him the qualifying offer. You had a guy like Killian Hayes, who Jordi says he's looked great in camp, hasn't played. We haven't really seen him play, right? Someone who I was very interested in. Watford hurt. My going into training camp, my dark horse candidate was going to be Watford just because I feel like he could do a little bit of everything. Out of the guys who didn't get minutes for either injury or just low playing time, who are you most like disappointed that you didn't get to see in these games?
It's almost comical the amount that we've talked about Killian Hayes on our podcast, but that might be the most disappointing. Just not because the sample size in his career at the NBA level is so phenomenal and he's just been out with injuries. No, he cannot shoot. He has not been proven to be able to shoot at the NBA level, and yet because you have this void in the backcourt, because you project forward another year and Schroeder is gone and Shake Milton is gone and Ben Simmons is gone, right? So all these ball handlers go out the door. You can envision a world where it's here for him to carve out a role for himself and claim it. So that's been disappointing from that standpoint. The Watford piece, it's disappointing, albeit in the limited sample size we were going to get with any of these guys. I'm not overly concerned as long as he gets back into this rotation pretty quickly, because you bring up the good point. He's not Ben Simmons by any stretch. No one's accusing him of being that. But he does have some get the rebound, push the pace, ball handling. Like if you went down the list of the best ball handlers on this team, it's changed a little bit this offseason, but he's in the top 6 probably. Like, might be top 6 in ball handling in terms of ability to bring up the court and have some confidence to move the ball around the floor, set up some players in good positions. And he has decent court vision, right? He makes some silly errors, but he's still a relatively young player. So I'm excited to see how he looks, because you fast forward and Ben Simmons is off this team next season. And I think that role can continue to grow. That's kind of the benefit for Watford right now. Zaire Williams is not that guy. Dorian Finney-Smith is not that guy. You don't have a player of his same type of mold that is getting reps and taking it away from him in that regard.
Cam Thomas, arguably the face of the franchise at this point. I've talked to people in basketball that work with analytics. I've talked to the beat writers. I've talked to people around the team. Everyone gives me a different answer. So I'm going to ask you this. What is the value of Cam Thomas?
Yeah, we've had that discussion over the years, that he seems to be a very polarizing player around the league, because other GMs in passing will say, I wouldn't give him contract X, right? I wouldn't be paying Cam Thomas $20 million a year on a contract. And then you watch the games and you see how electric he can be offensively, and something doesn't seem to quite be there. What I will say is, whether or not they end up giving the contract, first of all, it behooves the Nets probably to give him a contract, because they're going to have to keep money on the books next year anyway. And there's going to be a lot of money, even just in Ben Simmons alone, coming off. Now, that's not a reason to sign a player by itself. It's the same thing with Nic Claxton. There was no harm done in bringing him back and making him a $100 million player. I think that likely will be the mold that they follow with Cam Thomas. The other thing is, over his tenure, he's had 3 different coaches. And, even the Jacques Vaughn era, it was, he needs to do certain things. They talked about him a certain way, as if something was happening that was being asked of him that Cam Thomas was not doing. Now, we understand offensively, when he first came into the league, it was, I'm going to get that ball, I'm going to dribble that ball, I'm going to shoot that ball. We even heard him this offseason say, I need to get better at moving the basketball, finding the outlets. And at the same time, when the shot clock's winding down, guess what? Everyone looks to me to make something happen. And that's still going to be a part of his game. But I believe that we have seen, I said this after the first preseason game, and it felt even more concrete after the third. Cam Thomas's dedication on the defensive end, whatever Jordi Fernandez has laid out for him, he's clearly taken to it. And that's not going to be his calling card. But there's just a different mentality, it seems like, from him in these preseason games and heading towards this regular season. I think by the time we end up talking contract, maybe it'll be next offseason, I think the narrative and opinion around Cam Thomas will have coalesced a little bit more, where he is an electric offensive player. He's an effort guy on the defensive end. And hopefully we start to see that glimpse of a little bit of the on-ball playmaking ability for others that starts to make him look like a complete player, as opposed to an electric scorer that maybe is best suited on bad teams putting up 40-point nights. I believe he has a role and identity with this team going forward beyond this year, and I think we'll see that come to fruition under Fernandez.
Is he best suited as a sixth man? Like I told you, I talked to some people. I've been told that he's a future all-star. I've been told that he's the next Jamal Crawford or Lou Will. I've been told he's a bench piece. What do you think he is?
Yeah, I mean, so if right now you put him on a championship caliber team or a playoff caliber team, and you said you're going to be Lou Will, you're going to be, Jamal Crawford, you say, well, great, right? You're going to be this micro bucket off the bench. You're going to come in, you're going to rain threes, you're going to get at the bucket. I think that he is far too good getting downhill and attacking at the basket, absorbing contact, adjusting in midair. His free throw rate percentages are through the roof. Like, he is way too good of a player. And it's not a knock on being a sixth man, because some of them are legends in the game. I think he's way too good to be talked about as just being a sixth man. I think he'll ultimately always be a two guard, and the best way to unlock him in totality is to get in a really elite point guard, right? Give me an elite point guard with some size, with some length and court vision. And you talk about, this isn't dreaming on Killian Hayes here. It's like, find that point guard. You find that guy. Cam Thomas can do enough things on his own if you're off the court, but when you're on the court, it's why we look at the Ben Simmons sample size and say, yeah, when you've got a guy that pushes the pace and it can do good things on ball and can, in theory, for Ben Simmons, pressure defenses going to the paint, it makes life so much easier for Cam Thomas. So it's less a judgment on him and more, again, a judgment on the roster construction. And that's not a knock on the Nets. It's just, you're not there yet. Once this team has those pieces around him, I think his game will look a lot different. And I think it's a real failure of the organization to have not found a way to try to integrate him more when you had Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden, because those were times when you maybe could have really started to see a leap forward from his game. There's some version of it where parts of the fan base look at it and say, yeah, why'd you take so long to let him really start to get big minutes? It's going to be year 4. But when you look at how many games he played and the average minutes he had, this is still the infancy of his career in a lot of ways. And he's still young enough to not know what the true ceiling is. But I'm optimistic about him. And I think people are slowly coming around on him.
Oh no, I think.
I mean, the fan base has come around on him. I mean, like the NBA at large, right? Like the fan base has always been dedicated to him. The NBA seems to be fickle on him. And I think a lot of that is just like, you don't see it. Like, if you're not watching it, you don't know it. But then when you listen to other players talk about Cam Thomas, you hear, I think that's the perspective that's going to permeate more. Nets fans, by and large, have been on him since day one and feel like the organization has been preventing them from getting truly excited about him.
I don't know how you feel about this. There was a press conference with Jordi saying that he wants Cam to be a little bit more efficient. The whole thing with Clowney and the 5 turnovers about Schroeder. I like the attention to detail. I love that someone is sort of just like putting a fire underneath their asses. I think there's going to be some burnout if you do this for an entire season, though.
I think he did not fight hard enough. Obviously, it's a great learning experience for everybody. Like, there's technicalities, obviously, like how you front somebody, how you push him out. Like, it's definitely a challenge. But I would have liked to see a better fight, and it's just not just Noah, it's everybody else. The reality is, our true point guard Dennis had 5 turnovers, so obviously we cannot afford him to play like this, because he's a really, really good playmaker. He's a floor general. He does the right thing, so he has to be better.
I understand right now you're laying down the foundation, but imagine going to work every day and your boss is just on your ass. Like, this isn't the 90s NBA, right? The players have a lot more say, and I feel like there's a lot less stricter coaches. What's your take on all of that? Am I too harsh?
No, I mean, listen, I said it after that preseason game. It came out, started the second half. Noah Clowney was nowhere near the closeout on the 3-point shot. Jordi Fernandez called an immediate timeout, and you saw him. Now, listen, he wasn't Bobby Knighting throwing a chair onto the court, right, and losing his mind or something, but he was pointing to the spot and saying, hey, where were you? That's your responsibility, right? And you heard Clowney come out after, and he talked about how he's switching between the 4 and the 5 at times, so realizing, like, where is his assignment in his given role when he's in that versus when he's switching over to the 5 and playing closer to the basket, and he needs to adjust to that. We've highlighted how good Noah Clowney is going back to last year. Everyone regards him as like a human sponge when it comes to coaching and watching film. Hey, you teach me something, I digest it, I apply it. So, listen, yes, I'm a big proponent of Jordi Fernandez is trying to set a standard, right? And you have a whole bunch of veterans. And by the way, Jordi came out after and said it's everybody. It wasn't just Noah. It was everyone. Effort, energy, focus, all those things. I think you have a good group of veterans that understand that and are going to show up and play and be professionals. Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson, Schroeder, all these guys, right? So you feel good about that. From a burnout piece, here's the thing that I think people don't gravitate towards is Cam Thomas came out when they were talking about Chi knocking down some triples in the second preseason game. And he said, oh, yeah, it all relates back to like us being together and getting to know one another and feeling good and all getting along and wanting to have a good season.
That's like bullshit, right?
No. But here's my point.
Isn't it like bullshit, though? Because what else are they going to say?
No. But here's the point. That's a perfect example, right? So a player comes out and says, like, yeah, like we're all having a good time. We get along with one another. We want to play together. We're all excited for one another. Great. That goes by the wayside. Jordi Fernandez calling out a young player for not executing a play correctly. That becomes the lightning rod. Oh, he's going to be too hard. We're going to have burnout over the course of the season. You can't. These are young guys. You're trying to develop them. Who cares? Yeah, call it a vet too. That's fine. Yeah,
you don't think there's
he called him out. He said he had 5 turnovers. He said,
veteran in front of the media?
I disagree with the idea that you're calling him out. It was factual. If you went and asked Dennis Schroeder how he felt about his performance that night, he said, I had 5 turnovers. I'm the point guard. I got to control this thing. I can't afford to do that. He would tell you that himself. And again, this is what I'm saying. Inside that same exact conversation, same exact session for Fernandez, he complimented Schroeder, his game, his play style, how important he is for the team, and then said that's why we can't afford to have that kind of sloppy play. We can't afford to have those turnovers. So you're always going to take, not you, the royal we. Everyone's going to take the negative component and say, oh, is this a problem? Is this going to be an issue? Now you're stepping over the part where Fernandez is talking about the positive things players are doing, what they're developing, what they're working on. We're talking about 3 preseason games with an entire year ahead. And I think that, is Jordi Fernandez going to every single night take a timeout in the early third quarter to call a player out? Of course not. But he's doing it now before you get into the season, so you don't hopefully see that. It's a balance to me. I don't really have any concern about it. I just can't see a world. Listen, if there's going to be burnout for this team, it's going to be that they're going to lose a ton of games. So where do I want to be more concerned? That the head coach spends 82 games trying to instill a system, a philosophy, a structure that he wants everyone to buy into? Am I going to be worried about burnout about that? Or am I going to be worried about some players that are going to maybe check out because you're 3-17, you're 5-20 at points in this season, and you feel like, what's the point? That's why you're trying to instill this stuff now. Because guess what? You're going to get blown out a ton of games, but you still want to see the same hustle, the same drive, the same energy, the same focus. So yeah, I push back on it. Like, I don't think that that's going to be a concern. And you're paid to play. I know you mentioned before, you show up to work. Listen, if I show up to work and I'm doing my job and my boss is riding me all the time, yeah, I'm going to be pissed off. If I show up to work and half the time I'm taking early lunch breaks and I'm not getting my work done, yeah, then my boss is going to get on me, right? So it's about doing your job and showing up and doing it. And all these guys seem like they're going to. I love Noah Clowney, but he made a mistake. Great. So he nipped it in the bud. I don't know. I don't have a problem with it. And maybe I'm a little bit of an older generation. I'm not that much older, but I didn't see it as being an issue at all. Like I only brought attention to it over on X because it felt like there was this concern around burning out these young players, where I just don't see that being an issue.
But where my worry is, where my concern is, and by the way, I'm not as concerned as people are on X, because it is just one game, like you said, and I don't think we're going to be seeing this over and over and over. But 2 points: how often do you see a veteran getting called out by a head coach in a preseason game to the media? It's different when it's in game. Like I had no problem with the timeout with Clowney and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And even calling Clowney out in front of the media because he is a young player. I think it's interesting to see a vet get called out, especially someone who's like a journeyman like Dennis Schroeder, right? Mm-hmm. And to the second point, I would say to add on what you said, I think the losses and the strict coaching compounds each other, right? If you're winning, you can get away with that. You could be a strict coach if you're winning. But when you're getting blown out by 20 each night, and you're going through some of this shit, I don't.
Yeah, and I would say, so on the Dennis point, I think you can, if you want to take it positive, you say it's because Jordi Fernandez has job security, right? He took on this job. He's a rookie head coach, and the organization understands this is going to be a bad year from a wins and loss standpoint. Now, Schroeder is not LeBron James or Luka Doncic, right? He's not a veteran of that ilk, and I know no one's suggesting that he is. But again, like, he's not long for this team, for this organization. That's not a knock on him. We like him, actually. We think he was a great pickup last year and he'll have value for this team this season. But he is not of a stature that you should feel like you cannot speak to. By the way, go back to the era of Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, right? And this is, I'm not throwing this to throw shade at Kyrie, but when you have a player that comes out and says, sometimes me coach, sometimes him coach, sometimes we all coach, right? Like, I tell you what, if I'm going between the two, I want the coach that's telling you what it needs to be and what we need to do, not the player that is saying, maybe sometimes I go off script. And again, that's not about Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving or James Harden. That's about an institutional failure, putting a guy like Steve Nash in charge who had no business being the head coach, right? So we understand there's a lot of gray areas to all of that stuff. But Jordi Fernandez has full confidence and support of the organization. So you can tell it's his team. How? Because I'm going to go ahead and let my young players know what they need to be doing. I'm not going to be concerned about, again, calling out is one way to put it. I just think telling the truth about what happened in the course of a game. The second part about compounding burnout between those two things, I can appreciate that because the season is going to be long and it's going to be rough, right? Like, and that's not going to matter in terms of, like, coach them hard, coach them soft. They're going to lose a lot of games. I think my counterpoint to it would be go down the path where Jordi Fernandez coddles them all year, because it's a rough season. You're young players. We're trying to develop veterans. You guys are going to get traded eventually. Who cares? Everyone take it easy. And I know that's not like what you're saying, but that's the other path. Don't be too hard, but be a little bit more soft on, you want to split the difference and go down the middle. I can appreciate that. I think that's what Jordi's going to be as a head coach. Like, again, it was a moment here. It was a comment in the media. The totality of his media session, the totality of his coaching in that preseason game was all positive. It was good things building in a positive direction. So if you take these two small instances and extrapolate them out, yeah, it could be a problem. But I just really do not see it being the case. And I think you will see plenty of games this year when they say back-to-backs, veterans sit down, rookies are going to play, and you'll hear Fernandez probably talk after. He'll say, yeah, we want to get better here, here, and here, but I really liked what Noah Clowney did over here. I liked when Keon Johnson came in, right? Like, I think you're going to get the praise, and I just think that, I don't know, getting caught in the weeds on this kind of stuff in preseason is just too far afield for me for what the intentions of this year are supposed to be.
Oh, yeah, that's totally fair. And I mean, I could be going a little harsh, but called out. We do a little clickbait game over here.
Yeah.
Little,
no, by the way, and I don't mean, we all fall victim to it, right? Something gets posted up and you're like, whoa.
But I appreciate your take. I can appreciate your take. Win total, I think the sportsbooks say now it's like 18.5 games. Are you over or under on that?
I would probably take the under on it, but you win some games late in the season and you end up winning 20. Far and away one of the lowest over under win totals that we've seen in some time.
Because I forgot to ask you this. CJ's contract is just so bad, in my opinion, with this new CBA. I have a theory that I think unless his play goes up or you find a team maybe in the West Coast that's hungry enough, that we might actually have to give a protected first rounder somewhere down the line to get off that contract if you're going to look for a team to get, to take on the 2 years plus of $20 million plus whatever you're going to pay him this year. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's not a good contract. I agree with you, right? Like, we thought maybe a little bit of a bargain in the moment when we first signed it, then the sample size, not so much bargain, injury concerns. I think the injuries are really the problem for him, right? Like, that's actually what I think hurts the contract overall. It's not that it's perfect by any stretch. I think there's teams that would like to have him again. He's the type of player whose value gets elevated on a championship caliber team as opposed to a middling pack team, right? Put him back on the Suns right now, and all of a sudden he's just wide open every single possession, able to try to knock down some of those wide open threes. But that being said, 58 games, 42, 66, 60, 58, right? So he has not been a healthy player over his career either. So that probably is what hurts the contract value as much as anything. Before the Nets would be attaching any asset to moving his contract, he'll play the contract out. The Nets will just keep him. They need money on the books. There's no reason for the Nets to need to do something to get him off the book. So I get the concern there as far as the contract maybe being bad, but there's nothing stopping the Nets from just paying out that contract over the next couple of seasons. They're going to need guys on the roster. They're going to need money on the roster. Reaching the cap salary floor is going to be a challenge for the Brooklyn Nets, even if they pay Cam Thomas. So they're going to bring contracts back in. I wouldn't be worried about needing to get rid of him in some capacity at this point anyway. And I honestly, he's the least likely to me to be moved this season out of all the players anyway.
Starting to wrap things up, what is your favorite Nets jersey of all time? Could be New Jersey, Brooklyn, whatever era.
Yeah, I'm a jersey guy. I mean, I love the old. I mean, the ABA ones were cool, obviously, like those retro styles. The Basquiat ones that they had a few years ago, I thought those were like some of the best city editions, and I think they've had a hard time getting back to getting back to a quality one.
Yeah.
I haven't loved them as much in more recent years. Those are a couple of really good ones. I liked they had the gray and blue for a very brief amount of time in Brooklyn. I can't remember what year that was. I know it's like not their core colors, but I thought that those look sharp. Like I would love if they incorporated a little bit of that. Yeah, so those
Brooklyn
are a few
Dodger
of my
ones
favorite,
too?
and I love the jersey ones, like, Jason Kidd era, the stitching up the side, like, that was, I grew up on Kendall Gill and Keith Van Horn and, Kerry Kittles and getting in and then, into the Vince Carters and everything else and Kenyon Martin. So, those just, I think they hold a special spot because I remember growing up watching them on those playoff runs and like that. So, yeah, those are a few of my favorite though. What's your go-to jersey?
Oh, it's a Dr. J. Obviously, it's
Yeah,
that's
yes, you
I
go
always
ABA.
tell
Well,
my
that's, yeah,
guests,
that feels like that's easy. That's a layup one. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's okay. You give me a little shit. Okay.
I'm just
I
saying,
love the Brooklyn.
remember that time when we had that player and then they traded him away and he went on to be a legend? Yeah, like, oh, I wish we had those jerseys. Yeah, for sure.
I just like the aesthetic of it. I even like the blue ones where it says New York on it. But
Yeah,
I'll give you a different answer since you gave me a little shit.
Hmm.
I love the Brooklyn Dodger ones. Maybe that's what you were talking about with the gray sleeves.
Yes.
I love that. I'm from Brooklyn. I love that jersey. Take off the sleeves. Let's bring that back. I'd love to see that. That would be a beautiful look for them.
And by the way, their best court they ever had was when they first did the subway perimeter. That's going back, what, 4 seasons now? When they first did that, like that court looked great. And then they got into these weird wonky color. It's all money. This is in the weed stuff that Doug will never talk about when we're on the podcast. Aesthetics of courts and uniforms, something that he couldn't care any less about. But those things, like I noticed those things, and there's something about like the vibe when you go to a game with the jerseys, the court, it all comes together to get you that kind of energy. So yeah, I'd love it if they mix those up a little bit again this year. I haven't even looked at what their city editions are going to be this season.
It's bad.
Oh, is it?
The city edition this year, it's a cause again. They're doing the cause thing again.
See, that's a bummer.
Oh, well. I don't like it either.
Last year's, what was the thing they had last year? That one on paper, like when you saw the images of those, I thought they were hideous. Like, I was like, man, these things are the worst. They are disgusting. Now, they still weren't one of my favorites, but they did look way better on the players than off. Like, they looked so much better when they were wearing them on the court than when they showed them, like, just as the still frames. Oh, the swingman jersey. Yeah. Like, those uniforms, I thought on paper, I was like, good Lord. But they ended up being a little bit better once you saw them on there. So, I don't know. Maybe I'll be impressed again this season when they come back to it.
All right. You've been very professional with all this, with all my Wi-Fi problems in the background. Thanks so much for joining me. Any plugs you want to throw out there?
Oh, we plug everything. Lockedonnets with Doug Norrie. You can also check out the One Giant podcast with Andy Makowitz. We break down the New York Football Giants all week long as well. So you can find me there and at Adam Armbrecht over on X too if you're looking for some random thoughts throughout the day.
Thank you guys for watching. You can follow me on Twitter at NetFans. You're watching this on YouTube right now. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed the episodes and you keep on coming back. If this is your first time watching, I do this podcast every week. I've talked to former players. I talk to beat writers, sports analysts, and other Nets content creators. And I talk to pretty much anybody around basketball or in Nets lore. Thank you guys so much for the last couple of weeks. The views have been amazing. Thank you guys so much for taking your time out to watch the show. I have a really, really big announcement dropping next week. Huge news for the podcast. Have a good day. Have a great night. Whatever you're doing, be safe. And let's go Nets. I'm out.